Okay, welcome to the Graphic Sales Stories podcast. We are talking about our forecasting comic, and if you don't remember it, this is the one. I'm not going to leave it up long enough for you to read, but there's a link below where you can read the whole thing.
Yeah. Let me just, Tom, tell you quickly that it's important to people. I guess we have to stress that this podcast is to actually is to accentuate the comics that we put out there. I was talking to my brother-in-law over Thanksgiving, and he's like, "Oh, I saw the podcast. That's great. I'm like, do you see the comics?" He's like, "What comics?" I'm like, "Oh my God, this is about the comics." He's like, "No." He's like, "Yeah, I watched the podcast." I'm like, "Did you read the comics?" He's like, "No, I watched the podcast." I'm like, "Read the comics. That's what this whole thing's about." Anyway, so read the comics, people. Read the comics.
Please read the comics. So yeah, we want to talk about forecasting really from the leadership level, how we can like help our team succeed better and understand their own business. And I think, Peter, the story of the comic is something that you lived through directly, right?
Yeah, it's there's going to be many stories about the guy in this. I think we called him Mike. Um, uh, uh, did this, and it is just something that a lot of people who are friends in the industry know the story because it is comical. Like you do the forecast as a leader for a couple different reasons. One of them is to make sure, I'm like, oh, do I understand, telling my leadership what's going to close? Do I feel comfortable that I'm going to hit that number? If I'm going to, at least my whole thing was, am I going to come into like 80% of what I'm forecasting in the stretch goals? But the second, does the rep know his own business? And as you can tell from this comic strip, the rep doesn't know his own business. Like, hey, I have this is what my funnel tells me. If I close everything, this is the best case. But this is, if only what I put in the funnel and I know is going to close is my worst case, and then this is my most likely, which usually is the worst case plus, hey, a couple of things I know I can pull in. In this guy's situation, he's like, well, the worst case is going to be, my worst case is 5,000. My most likely is going to be zero. I'm like, the hell, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
And he gets so angry with me. He's like, well, the most likely, like, people won't sign up with me. I'm like, what, man? I know sales is not 100%, but you gotta know your business. So I think, as we'll talk today, it is that's the whole thing. Is does the salesperson know the business? And then, and I think, you and I talked about this before, but one of my favorite quotes from my reps at this around this time frame was, I don't micromanage the person, I micromanage the business. And that is, how can I really understand your business so I can remove obstacles and help you close that business to get you, that best case scenario, which, by the way, is when you get the most comp, right? So if we can bring in and get those accelerators going, that's my job. Is like, great, if you can get yourself to 80% of your number, 100% of your number, how can I get you to the 120% of the number? What can we do? Not just throwing, like, let's get a discount, like, but what's the customer's decision? What's his criteria? What's pain is he trying to solve? How do we really understand why this guy's looking for this, and then use that to bring the deal in, and what levers can we push and pull to get that deal in? So I think it's just really understanding the business, and so when you're doing the forecasting, it is, how well do you know your business, and how well do you know those levers that can be pulled and pushed to get it to be brought in? So
yeah, that's that's the key aspect, right? Is, as a manager, do you understand the business? And by that I mean, do you understand what moves deals through stages, what closes deals? And we're not talking discounting here. We're talking about, like, hey, if this deal's in stage 4 and we haven't talked to the legal team or we haven't talked to the CFO yet, right? Then how is that really going to close in 2 weeks? And so managers need to understand the business, because how many forecasting meetings, Peter, have you been? Well, as a consultant, I've observed a lot of forecasting meetings where leadership or the manager is asking questions of the rep that tell them nothing about what that deal is really doing. And
right.
it gives the rep an out. It's like, hey, what's going on with that deal? Is kind of maybe it's a nice starting question, but it doesn't get the manager to, like, understand, is that real or not? It's like discovery, on your rep, do they understand their business?
Yeah, it is. It is amazing to me. Like there's, and if if you're watching this, there's the good managers and bad managers. Do you know your business? And then there's others who are just the spreadsheet jockey. Okay, what are you going to close? Let me write that down, and then make sure Salesforce.com matches this. So I'm going to manipulate this just to make it look like a number. But month in and month out, they fail to hit their forecasting numbers simply because they don't know the business. They're not asking the right questions, as you said. It's the same thing. If I'm not asking the right questions by rep, what am I training them for? What the right questions are to ask the customer, right? their prospect.
Yeah.
So it's all the same. It's like, okay, what are we doing here? Why is the customer making this decision? I remember this other rep I'll have a lot of stories about got angry with me once because they had a deal that I felt very comfortable with. I had been working with him through the whole thing and gone to a bunch of meetings, and I felt comfortable they were going to go with us. Well, he calls me up one day. He's like, "Oh, they chose to go with Sprint," and I'm like, "Well, that's unfortunate." I'm like, "What happened?" And I'm like, "Why did they go with Sprint?" He's like, "Well, he just said that they were going with Sprint and wasn't going with us." He was very angry, and I'm like, "Well, did you explain to him why you decided to go with a solution that you went with?" And he's like, "Well, Peter, because you told me." And I'm like, "Yes, but there's a reason. Did you tell him the reason?" He's like, "Peter, you're the one who told me to do this, and that's the reason why we lost this business." I'm like, "Okay, but there's a reason why we solved the business case. What was the reason?" He just kept on saying, "Well, it's your fault. You told me to do this and to design it this way." I'm like, "Okay, thanks." I just hung up with the guy, or he hung up with me, and I'm just like, "Okay." And I called the customer. And I asked him, like, "Hey, what's Sprint doing to solve business?" He's like, "Well, we're just gonna stay the same thing." I'm like, "Oh, if you recall, this is the solution we came up with." And I kind of walked him through. He goes, "Actually, that makes more sense." And he decided to go with us. So I called Jim back. I'm like, "Hey, he's gonna go with us." He's like, "Would you offer him a cheaper discount?" And like he's like, "I've been telling you I wanted cheaper. Did you give me cheaper?" I'm like, "No, I explained to him why we went with him." I'm like, "And here's the business reasons." And this guy did not last long, and he was gone. He was so frustrated. But I'm like, you have to understand their business motives, right? Like, this is the reason why you're choosing to. This is how we're going to solve your pain point, not because it's cheaper. If it solves a business pain point, that's what we want to do. And the customer was a great customers for a long time after that. But this is forecasting comes into this. Do you know why the customer is making a decision? What are the reasons he's making a decision? Because then we can use that to help levers to pull it in maybe a month earlier than we thought.
Yeah, that really is the key. And I think in the forecast meeting, the leadership or the manager asking those right questions. I got to sit in on Craig Herman's forecast meetings. He's a VP of sales, been a few places that I've worked with him, but he asked a really good question of his reps. And it depended where the deal was, what the answer would be. But he would say, "What happens if they solve this problem?" Something like that. "What are the consequences if they solve this problem? And if they don't?" Right. And what was interesting, and this is where you have to kind of be an astute manager, because the rep would answer with assumptions. They're like, "Oh, well, if they don't do this, they're going to lose money, or they're not going to be compliant." And then this is astute manager Craig would say, "But what did they say is going to happen?" And we ideally the positive, right? You want the customer to think about the good things that are going to happen when we solve this problem. And he said, "But what did the customer say?" And he'd be like, "Well, I don't know. They didn't say anything." Right. And that was what was key. And then, Craig and a good manager didn't just leave him hanging, like, "Okay, here's what you can do." Right. Again, later stage deals, if they're going to close this month, I mean, we should be well past this point, but a lot of reps aren't. Is let's give them a call. Let's talk about this. Let's kind of probe into, why this matters. Do we even really have a deal here? Is there a consequence? Is there impact to them of solving this problem that's positive? Or if they don't, what's negative? That's gold.
It is. It's a great test. Like, a lot of these stories will come out before I really kind of got the team where I wanted the team, and the forecasting after I got the team to be like the A plus players, those questions, the forecasting became a much different place, and in Terry Connell and other my leaders, forgive me, I did sandbag a lot of stuff, but the conversation it wasn't as what can we pull in? It was more like they knew their business, we knew the business so well. We were like, okay, for us to make sure, because I looked at everything as a quarterly. I'm like, for us to hit my, so for me as an office, I wanted to be 125%, each quarter. So we ended the year at 125%. So some guys will be like, hey, I've got this huge deal. I'm like, great, you know what? Can we bring that in next month? Because, Alan's a little bit late over here. We could cover this up. And so we started moving things around and then making sure it wasn't affecting their comp, right? So basically that was a big conversation. I'm like, how is this going to, crush your comp and all that type of stuff? Is there a difference there? But you started moving things around. And I loved that. That was like 2 years of that stretch where it was just so nice of just we knew the business so well that we're like, okay, we know what we're bringing in each and every month. So we can kind of really forecast 6 months out and say, we know what's going to come in for those 6 months. We just kept on playing that way. But until that point, the previous one was like how asking questions, do you know your business? Like, okay, to your point, like, why is the customer think they need to make a decision this month? Like what's their driving motivation to get this done? Is it the budget, right? It's the end of the year. A lot of times it's they need to get the budget in. Is it because they have to get a program? They're moving their offices. They're doing something. What is the motivation behind that? And a lot of times is like, this guy that's about would be like, well, they really like me. I'm like, I can't tell you how many times he's like, well, they really like me. I'm like,
really? That was the answer?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Multiple times. I'm like, yeah, everybody loves you. You're a great guy. That's why they're going to choose to make this, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year decision because they like you.
Oh dear. Yeah. That's a big red flag right there. So so when someone says that, right, as a coach, as a manager, how do you teach them to think about that they don't care about you? They're not going to spend $100,000 because they like you by this date. What did you say to get them to learn from that?
It's your point, asking them pointed questions like, okay, to ask the customer, what the decision, why they're making the decision, what pain points they're solving here, who is involved in this, and the who's involved is very interesting, because you had a lot of people step back and like, well, this guy's signing the paperwork. I'm like, yes, but there's a lot of things that we dealt with. I'm like, we're not just selling to one person. This is this WAN network and the security and all the stuff we're selling impacts the whole company. So yeah, they might not be the decision, like the person who's going to sign the paperwork, but they're going to be an influencer. And so who's involved with this, and make sure they're all on understanding how this is going to solve all of those people's pain points. So it's getting the conversation with the right people. And so when you have people like this story is about, who used to get so frustrated, like, I know this guy's a guy who signs paperwork, and he gets so defensive. I'm like, I get that he's signing the paperwork, but again, what we're doing is solving is a business issue that it's widespread outside this guy's department, and he has people he's trying to explain to why this is going to solve their pain points. So you need to understand the full business, the full scope, and the full impact. So a lot of coaching there to try to help them. Also going on appointments and asking the questions and seeing how the conversation changes. A good rep, and there are so many good reps I worked with, that once they kind of saw, me and some of the other leaders, sort of as a SE director for the Northeast, that go out with some of these really good managers, the reps would see the questions we were asking, how the conversation would turn to a conversation rather than me trying to pitch them, right? So what's business, and those reps were really good. Like, okay, they change their tactics, they see it, and they become better by asking the right questions, and then becomes easier forecasting and so forth. But this rep, there's a lot of them were just stuck in the old way, like, hey, we're going to be the cheapest rate. They're going to buy from us because we're the cheapest guy out there, and they really like me. They take my phone call when I call them. Like, that's nice, but the world's changing, and that's not why people make decisions anymore.
Yeah, the pitch is not. Everyone that talks about a pitch, it's the questions. The questions are selling. It's not pitching, right? It's all about like the questions you ask. The questions are even a pitch, right? You ask the right question, and they get it wakes someone up in their mind, like, oh, I can achieve that You ask them the right question, like, hey, if you were to do this, what would that do for you? And they can see the results. The pitch is baked into that, right?
Yeah.
Just by asking that question, they know that you're going to solve that problem for them and make their life easier, or, achieve that number.
Yeah. If you're asking the right questions, it's this rep Brian, and I used to tell him, like, you sit back and shut up. Like, once you could see it happening, you have the right conversation, and as you're explaining how we can solve the business, what the solution is, the customer, you can see the light. So many times we're in so many meetings, you see the light on, and like as soon as you see that light on, just sit back and shut up, because they start like, oh, I could do this. Oh, I see. They start, and you just sit back and shut up. Just sit back and listen.
Yeah, that's a great rule of thumb, right? If you see like two people in a meeting, you ask a question, and two of your buyers or the people on that team, they start having a discussion about it. Just hang back. That's gold, right? Now they're selling themselves on your solution. So yeah, get that rolling.
And I think people who know me knows that was probably the most difficult lesson I had, is just to shut up. And like, it's so exciting with them. Like, yeah, that's great. They start talking, part of the conversation. I'm like, no, just step back, shut up, just let them do it.
Yeah, it's all of ours. I now a lot of meetings are virtual. I'm like, when you ask that question, hit the mute button, right? Because you have a tendency to talk, and now you'll be talking and you won't interrupt their train of thought until they're just like, they come back to you. So you can't do that in a boardroom, talking to somebody.
Yeah. But it all comes back to forecasting. How well do you know the business? Can you forecast this is going to close or not? This is going to happen. And another story is, this guy Alan was fantastic, and he and I. So when there's a GM in Boston, we were coming back from a meeting, and Alan was like, yeah, that's not going to close. I'm like, yeah, it's not. And the GM was like, the meeting went fantastic. I'm like, yeah, you can tell by the way he's answering the questions. It's just not going to happen. And we were talking out, and the GM was like, you guys are so negative. That's definitely going to close. And it did, because we were like, I don't think he was really listening to what the conversation was. So I'm like, yeah, we're just not the perfect fit for them. And so they might as well stay with what they have. There's a couple of things that we can't do for them. And while they really liked our pitch and there was some positive, the meeting itself was a positive, we could just tell them, like, hey, they're going to realize that it's just easier to stay with who they are. And they did. And the GM was actually more annoyed with us than we did, because he's like, you guys are so negative about it. I'm like, we just understood what the customer was saying.
Yeah, you have to know their business as well as they do, right? That's your business acumen, to use the industry term, right? So then you're like, I asked that question. They said, we're not, we can't solve that. And even tell them that, right? You're better off staying with what you have. You're not going to make anything better.
Yeah. I'm going to tell this story. So I'm actually just tell the story, because it reminded me of this guy, again, not a great rep, but he always felt that I was negative towards him, and he wasn't good. And he just, because I was trying to coach him all the time, he's one of the guys who told me, he's like, he was always upset because, like, you take everything I say literally. I'm like, well, I don't know how else to take it. But anyway, so we're coming home from this meeting, and so I'm his manager, and we met with this customer who was on MCI and was looking, their contract was up. And I had asked in the meeting, I had asked them, like, okay, are you seeing any, you're talking to anybody else? Are they proposing or any, anything different or whatever, which happened could come through. The guy was great. And he's like, well, I'm talking to MCI, of course, is my existing. And then my MCI rep, and he goes, I have a great relationship with, is over at AT&T. So I'm talking to them as well. And then, of course, you guys, I'm talking to you guys. And I'm like, okay, great. So you have MCI. Is there anything that they're doing that that's causing you any angst? He's like, no, they're great. I'm like, oh, okay. And AT&T have a great relationship with the rep. He's like, yes, she's been our fantastic rep for a long time. Great. And then there's us. Like, and we propose this. He goes, yep. He's like, it's the same thing that we've got from MCI and AT&T. I'm like, okay. So we leave the meeting. The guy's like, I felt really good about that. I'm like, you did? He goes, yeah. He goes, Peter, I know you're always saying negative things. He goes, but I feel confident that this is going to close. And I'm like, really? Why? He goes, you heard him. He really likes what we had to say. I'm like, That's not exactly what I heard. I heard I'm happy with MCI and I have a great relationship with this rep who's at another company, AT&T. He's like, but he really likes me as well, and he liked what we have to say, and our pricing was there. I'm like, yeah, we're not going to win this. And he was so angry. He's like, you're always negative and put my stuff down. Can't you just support me? I'm like, I'm trying to support you by telling you, don't forecast this.
Yeah, don't
This is
waste your
not going to
time
come
on
in.
this. Yeah, now you can cut bait and move on to the next one.
Yeah.
People
He
that
did
reps
not.
have happy ears, right? They just want to hear what they want to hear. And it's like, no, you got
Well,
to deal in reality here so you can spend your time on something that will close.
right. And part of the problem, and we talked about this in the last podcast, is doing the job you need to. Like, he had nothing in his, when you have nothing in your funnel, you're grasping on to that last one. I'm like, hey, I need this to close. I'm like, because you need it to close doesn't mean the customer it's going to close. Like, you gotta still do the due diligence understanding. So because you have a light funnel, then you become more optimistic about those because you need it to happen rather than is it going to actually happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me change the subject. Well, related, but technology, right? So,
Yeah.
there like forever, there are the managers that are like we talked about. It's just numbers jockeys, right? They're
Yeah.
just doing the math and they're asking reps like, hey, tell me how's that deal going? So it's surface level, it's data and it's surface level. And the ideal manager, right, can look at the data and then can ask the questions to find reality and then coach the rep and help them, right? Those are probably the 3 levels of being a great manager when it comes to forecasting. Do you understand data? Does it give you insights? Does it help you ask your reps questions? And does it help you help the rep close the deals? So there's tons of technology out there. And going back way before AI, right, we used a tool, it was like 2013, algorithmic based. And what we did with our forecast meetings is we looked at the data, right? And the reps would say, hey, I'm going to close this. And it was a list of the opportunities. And then, but the tool said, based on history, we're really going to close this right way down here. And what that enabled us to do was then now we had to drill in deeper.
Mhm.
And it had some other reports in there that would give us indicators, right? Like, oh, this deal, is supposed to close in 30 days, but you haven't talked to the CFO yet. And 80% of the deals that we close in 30 days, you've talked to the CFO. So I think for what I'm saying is that if you're a manager and you don't maybe fully understand your business, your data, is that use that, but use it to understand your business.
Yeah.
So you can craft those questions to ask, like, okay, now how do we get the CFO involved? Okay, when I was a rep, I would call them, let's do that together, right? So there is a place for data, but you have to peel back the layers and make sure you understand your business and what the data is telling you. Is that fair, Peter, in your experience?
Yeah, to your point, like this is where it always becomes you have to understand your job as a manager and as a rep. Tools are only as good as the person wielding it, right? And the where managers go wrong is just being that Excel jockey, right? Hey, Tom says he's going to close 10,000, but I'm going to take that 10,000 and I'm going to say he's probably going to close 70% of that, so I'll mark that $7,000. So, and then I'm going to do that for everybody else. I'm like, well, that's not really helping you. That might be historical. You might have a tool say that's historically what you do, but really what that data should be telling you is like, okay, then how can I bring that up? Like, okay, what's going on with it of $3,000?
Yeah.
What can we do as a business to make this? So that's where you have to really micromanage the business. And even I've taken from our last podcast where like it's a very simple job, but it's hard to do, right? So asking the right questions, the difficult questions, because those difficult questions could lead you to believe that this is not going to close, right? So then you got then your hope and desire is going.
So going back to that data point too, and to go back to the story I had, is that we were using the data, and I was a new manager, right? This team with new technology, and we set the goal to beat, that what the software told us, and the way we did that is we had to unpack it, right? I had to
Yeah.
learn the business better. The reps did, and it was a really fulfilling thing. The president, who is God, MIT grad, the smartest man I've ever met, super data driven. He used to build his own algorithms, and he used to it was crazy. Anyways, for him to come out of his office and say, look at the last 3 months versus the 3 months before that, and see the lines converging, right? Where the software said, hey, you're going to do this, your team says this, and they were doing this, to where what they were forecasting was getting very, very close. And
Yeah.
that was the learning experience for me as a somewhat new manager, and having this kind of data at the fingertips. So I think this goes back to the point you started with, Peter, that if you're a manager, right, and you don't fully understand your business, or you're new to the organization, learn that business and try to get those lines to converge, right?
Yeah.
Make your goal in 90 days that your team's forecast is accurate, or 128 days. Get as close to it. Then you'll know, and by the way, last point on this, as a consultant working with new companies, I'm often brought in because for repeated quarters, the VP of sales is reporting a forecast that is not achieved repeatedly. That's how I get a lot of business. That's a KPI that they look at, and they're like, you should probably talk to Tom, because they think the VP doesn't understand the business and doesn't know how to communicate with his reps on it. So it's business for me. Get your forecast right, and you'll keep me out of your hair.
Yeah. And I think too, like the where I get cautious from my side is when you start hitting tools. Salesforce.com is one of the most misunderstood tools out there. It can be a great tool, but it's so misused, right? People, managers, I have seen managers go in and change people's forecasts in order to meet what they're forecasting up. And it's not really they actually have their real forecast on a spreadsheet, and Salesforce.com, they're manipulating. So leadership doesn't know. So there's no communication about how do we use this tool? How do we understand this tool? Do we really understand what's going to come in? There are differences, like, hey, if you get a pretty big deal, anything can happen, but you're going along. But if it misses, then the forecast, if you're not using Salesforce.com right, then all of a sudden looks like you've really missed your forecast. And so you've got to understand and have a communication with leadership, like, I'm going to put this in the funnel, but you got to understand that because of the size of this deal, it could really sway us. Even though we're doing the right things, anything can happen. People die. You don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So that's where tools always, when people start leaning toward too much on the tool, I'm like, you still got to go back to the ABCs of selling. Like, do you understand their business? Are you doing the right things to close this? And is leadership not just looking at a spreadsheet, but they understand that they believe in their leaders. They have a conversation with the managers. So Terry Connell was a really good leader for me. He used to stretch me all the time, and I think he knew I was sandbagging. So he was constantly always pushing me to pull things in and stretch my goals. And he's like, I always prided myself. I'm like, I'm always within 95% when I'm going to close. Like, I knew my business really well. And he was like, I don't want you to be 100%. I want you to be 80%. Like, because I want you to stretch and get more.
Yeah.
And, so instead of forecasting your 125% of your number, forecast 150% of your number and come in at 130. He's like, then I'm really happy. And of course, I'm like, great. Then deal with the other managers who are not hit their numbers because they're guessing, and I know my business.
Yeah, and on that point, I mean, like I love CRM, by the way, and I love it when it's done right, where it's not tedious not overly tedious to the reps, but it has meaning. And by the way, like with certain, like I have a large manufacturing organization that I work with. If they don't get their forecasts right, and this company builds $100 million in hardware product that isn't going to ship, right? Because that forecast is actually driving manufacturing. Or if you're an organization that's driving, like, hey, we have to hire more people to staff because it's a service industry, right? Like, there's real consequences. I think a lot of SaaS companies, they don't care, right? Because it's like, oh, it's more software, it doesn't cost more to make it. But if you get into the industries with hardware or we're
Yep.
hiring people, and you get it wrong as a salesperson, like you can bankrupt the company or you can destroy profits. Like it really has meaning
Yeah.
when it comes to that kind of forecasting, guys.
And it's important. And again, this is what they call it. Like forecasting is really the manager's tool. Is how do I micromanaging my business? How do I know my business? And you got to have. I mean, we've talked a lot on our podcast. Like the manager really has to understand the sales reps. They have to understand their who they are as people. Are they doing the right things? And then are they asking the right questions? There's a lot to being a good coaching manager. And unfortunately, there's a lot out there just taking the pencil pushing, right? Just taking the Excel spreadsheet and just the last thing I'll say is another thing I'm always proud of when I traveled around. The reps really wanted to take me and the managers out on meetings because we helped. But when I was a sales rep, I got to tell you, I did not want to take my managers out. I'm like, these guys they're not helping, right? They're not asking the right questions. They're pushing. They're just making my life difficult, and I don't want to take them out. That's that's a bad sign if you're a manager that your reps don't want to take you out. You should be going out. You should be able to help them close business, ask the right questions, and basically sit and observe and help you, coach you to do a better job. But also, like, what can we do to bring this deal in? So,
Yeah.
um,
I work with a great VP, or have worked with this great VP in Canada, where during ramp, he would attend discovery calls, right? And he called it, I'm the second shooter, right? And what he meant by that was, and the reps felt comfortable because he was like, I'm just observing from a different angle and I'm there to support you. And he's the right guy, where it's like, man, he saw things that they wouldn't see. And he also leaned in when he needed to. And of course they make more money, right? If you've got your manager helping you close a deal, right? Everybody wins there. So, but yeah, hands-on is you got to be like a great manager. You got to be in the weeds, but you also have to be able to run the data. And that's the blend, I think, that you need to be as a great manager.
And as we're wrapping this up, it all goes back to the cartoon. Look at how much that held into that, just a couple panels that talks so much about this. Well, it is a true thing, and I think it's a funny story. This character, but there's so much more going on here, right? Like it's not just this guy's a dope and doesn't know how to forecast. There's a lot. Like, what's the point of forecasting? And we've all done it. Is it worthwhile? Not worthwhile? All that type of stuff. And then last, of course, there's your son Ted trying to drum up business for us.
Yeah, I Nepo intern. Actually, he's like, I'm a Nepo marketing specialist. He's like, I'm not an intern.
Well, that's why he's a marketing specialist. He knows how to spin that.
But yeah, yet again, Eli's amazing at drawing people. And by the way, one little nugget. This was, I think, your genius, Peter. The whole Scooby-Doo. This was a team effort, I think, for you and Eli. The Scooby-Doo reference. Hey, can you do that Scooby-Doo thing and have Tom out? And Eli always solves problems brilliantly.
Yeah. Well, that's funny. He actually made this into a little video too. Like, I think you saw that. Yeah.
This is fun. Oh no, we're erasing Tom. Bye, Tom.
But yeah, so forecasting, right? It's
where
an
evil necessity. Yes. It's a necessity. It's a necessity. And if you do it right, it's a good call. It's a good thing to have. It just gets painful when you don't have anything in your funnel. If you don't have any opportunities. Yeah, that stinks. That stinks.
Yeah. And that forecasting meeting, I had them on Fridays. I had them with my reps at 11 a.m. and then with the president at 4 p.m. on a Friday afternoon for a long time. And boy, that meeting sometimes went to 6 on a Friday night, and can be painful, but I learned.
Yeah, I'm having flashes of just nightmares. So we would have, and this is what, again, I spoke highly to Terry. Now I'm speaking the low of Terry. I'm like, Terry would have a call the last week of the month every single day, and would go over the funnel, I know my business, and so for me, my conversation was 2 minutes. Where are you at here? We need to close here. It's going to come in, or I'm at the number, or whatever. I get New York or DC or especially New York. we've got these huge opportunities. We're still closing it. I'm like, there's 2 days left in a month, and you've got 3 deals worth $100,000. I'm like, you think you're really going to close every single month? It comes down to these last 2 days. So I'm like, and it's just brutal to sit in those calls and just hear these guys. I'm like, you're just floundering and the flop sweating. It's like, I'd be just sitting on my conference call the last day of the month, and my team would be out there, and I'd have a beer in my desk, and I just have to sit there and listen to the whole thing for like a couple of hours every single day, last day of the month. And it was just brutal. And I couldn't not understand why the other managers like, just know your business better.
Yeah. It's not the way to run it. I mean, who wants to run? Oh, we're going to get to the last day and then we're going to talk about this stuff. No, it's got to be, ingrained. It's got to be. And one thing we used to do, I learned this from Peter Wayman, one of my bosses, boss a couple times, a mentor, was, we divided the month and the quarter. Like the month is now 25% done. There's now 75% of the month, right? We're at 15% of our number, right? So there was this sense of urgency daily to understand, are we going to get there? So this was, over time we learned to do this and to just, work on it on Mondays, right? How are we going to get 3 of these deals through by Friday? How can I help you? So then there's not the flop sweats on a Friday. Right? It's like, be involved in your business with your reps on a daily basis. That's what you're there for.
I remember being at a President's Club in I think it was in Vegas. And before we go out and have the fun, they had a morning meeting, and they're kind of going around the table. And they had the stats like, okay, 70% of our business closes in the last week of the month, right? So they're like, okay, how do we change that? And they picked on me like, Peter, yours doesn't. Now, I gave some BS answer. And the true answer was like, well, a lot of those deals that happened last week, we kind of hold off. And then we close them the first week of the next month. I'm like, so that's how we actually did this. But because we started doing that, the numbers were, we sandbag, and it pushed the numbers out, but I was able to control the numbers. But that's the way, like, I'm not rushing to get a deal in on the last day of the month. I'm actually, I actually remember this deal from this customer out in Boston, across from the Heinz Convention Center. And the guy's like, hey, I know you guys want the stuff last day of the month. I can sign this. I can get this done today. It was like the last day of the month. I'm like, no, that's okay. We come back on Monday. Come back next after the weekend. You come back and sign it. That's fine. He's like, really? I'm like, yeah, don't worry about it. I'm like, we got it. The rep was just laughing. He's like, yeah. He's like, yeah. There's different ways to pull the triggers. I'm not saying that this is sandbagging is the way to do it, but controlling your business, owning your business, understanding how that's going to, where it is. And again, as I said before, I'm like, we were hitting President's Clubs. We were doing the right things for the company. So the paychecks were great.
Yeah. And one last story on that, like one of the red flags I see when I do investigation is maybe someone hires me in the fourth quarter. I go into Salesforce or I go into the forecast and I see all of these deals with a close date of December 31st. Right. And I'm like, okay, you're picking the default, right? The close date matters, right? You have to build a work back plan. When do they need this to close and why? What's driving that? And then that's your number. And also just be realistic. You really want to be trying to close a deal on December 31st? No, December 15th, right? Have this discussion with your customer and things like that. So, just basic reality. And if you're analyzing your teams, you want to understand if your manager understands their team's business, just look at all the close dates to the last day of every month, right?
Yeah.
They're not based on anything.
Salesforce should come up with like the Parks and Rec. You said April Ludgate used to make up a number, but like December 32nd. That's the date it's going to close. December 32nd.
Awesome.
So you should just know it's all made up. Yeah. I think you wrote when you wrote that in your end of the year stuff. Yeah, there's definitely people moving. Like, everything. I had everything closing by the end of this year, so I'll have to move it to sometime next year.
Maybe the ironic thing here is that I had a deal close on December 31st, but it didn't matter to me. I didn't reach out to the customer. It was we already had a kickoff scheduled, and the DocuSign, he was on vacation. And
but hey,
get
that last day of the month. Last day of the year, last day of the quarter. It's huge.
It's not in awaiting paperwork anymore.
That's funny. You should
So
say it
thanks,
back. Like,
Brady.
no. Start next year. Start next year. That's great. But it is, and actually, it's funny. I was just talking to, just to stay on the end of the year, we talked about, counting and seeing where you are to President's Club. So I was talking to a good friend of mine, Chris Sikoris, fantastic. If you guys don't know him, you should get to know him. He's an unbelievable sales leader. But he was saying, he's like, yeah, that's what you want your sales rep. Like, how close are you to President's Club? You want them in December fighting for every single point. Like, what's got to get me over the edge here? And that was always like the last quarter. It was always a battle. And then it was funny when the team was really good. I talked about this a couple of years. The team was unbelievable. We'd gather around, and I think one rep had a small deal that was going to put over the other rep and gave it to him. It's like, here, take this. This will put you in President's Club. And so that basically almost the whole team went to President's Club because they were just, it's a great unit. It was a great team that looked at this, but that we always very close. Like, where are you to President's Club? Where are your percentages to President's Club? We watch that very closely. And those deals in December make a lot of big impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a good one. I got one last story. I know we were going long here, but so I had this guy on my team and never hit target, right? And before he was hired before I joined there, and a company that helped hire the company had like profiles on these people. So my boss was like, look at his profile again, right? So I looked at his profile, and one of his drivers was the team, right? It mattered to him what the team thought. So I created an incentive that month or quarter, I forget how we operated, that if Steve, I'll change the name to protect the innocent. I said, if everybody hits their quota this month, and everybody else was, but Steve, then there'll be a team dinner. I'll buy you dinner in Newport, we'll have a big night out. Right. So this put a lot of pressure on Steve, and literally the 10 o'clock Friday, the last day of the month, he was still there, and he closed that deal because he didn't want to let the team down. And so that was an incentive. I tried to coach him in a lot of other ways too, but sometimes as a manager, right, understanding your people, what motivates them. For him, it was, he was had so many issues, but
This is what I heard from that story. You profile people, so that's it, and you put undue stress on this guy. That's great. That's what I took from your story. is you put on a lot of stress on this guy and you profile them. No, but you're right. Like, understanding people's motivation is huge as a manager. I talk a lot of people about that. Like, we can get into another podcast about that, but understanding people's motivation as your sales rep, as your manager, it's huge. Everybody, you want to manage people to the same expectations, but people have different drivers, and you got to play to that. You got to get them
different skills. Play to people's strengths. I mean, that's one of the things I loved about being a manager. I'm like, well, this person's really good at that. Okay, let's assign that. Say someone's great at handling objections. Can you teach Akia like how to handle objections? Like and they're a mentor. Like, yeah, all those things are what makes, I think, management a lot of fun, is helping people achieve things because you recognize their talents or what motivates them and things like that. Playing to their strength, play to people's strengths, I guess, is the takeaway there. Yeah.
Yes. It's better than me saying, how do I get to use this person?
I might have been using Steve at this point because I was so like, how are we ever going to get there? Everyone's finally got their quota except this one person.
Yeah.
Anyways.
But good conversation. Good. This comic took me a while to figure out how to write it. So I think it's a good one. And I think you and I are learning that less is better for us because Eli captures so much in his artistry. So I think the stories are good, and there's so much behind them because we're writing less and letting him do more with the art.
Yeah, we've learned. I think you've told me that story in that comic, on several drives, and you've iterated it. And I thought the sort of Ted pulling at the end, like, how are we gonna close this one? Yeah. So that was a little gem. Like, that was a great ending. And the Scooby-Doo thing is I think one of my favorite.
Everybody loves the Scooby-Doo.
Ted, can you do that right now in this video? Can you Scooby Doo us out of this?
Yeah, let's Scooby this out. Let's Scooby Doo out.
Yeah, let's just Scooby Doo out of the end here.
All right. Welcome to 2025, everybody. We're gonna have
Awesome.
some great
All right.
comics.